Before I announce Jamie Good, who will talk about technology, labor, and the economics of survival in the vineyard, I ask my colleague Alexandra Fran to come to me on the stage. Alexandra Fran, wine journalist and co-founder of A2 Wine and Things. We curated this conference together and we will moderate this panel together.
Yes.
And my name is Anja Zimmer, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I was just about to introduce you, but thank you. Now I can cross out at least one half sentence. Yes, thank you again. I'm Alexandra Wann. I'm wine journalist, and Anja and I have founded not only the agency but this conference together. And yes, I'm welcoming you to the final of this second day at Agora. And as I imagine, everybody is like now full of data, information, inspiration. And this is why we had the idea to like smooth out after the last keynote and get you in the mood for a nice and smooth and loungy evening. And we came up with the idea to invite knowledgeable, inspiring wine personality from all over the world. And for today, we decided to talk about the viticulture of the future. And we invited one of the most knowledgeable wine personalities in the world to talk about this specific topic. And his name is Jamie Good. He knows best when it comes to the vineyard of the future, the vineyard of today, but of course, the vineyard of the future. Jamie is a wine writer, a wine columnist with the UK national newspaper, The Sunday Express. He is author of several books, manages his own blog, wineanorak.com. Check this up. And he produces a docu-series, The Science of Wine. But moreover, he also has a PhD in plant biology, which I think most wine journalists cannot say of themselves. At least I do not have any PhD. And this makes him even more knowledgeable about what is really happening in the vineyard.
So when we met first, Jamie and I, it was, I think, in Portugal, and he quite impressed me with the insistence he puts on wine science. He makes a strong case for a more evidence-based approach by examining topics ranging from terroir to sustainability to change to yeast. So there are a lot of things you can discuss with him. Sustainability is for him not a buzzword, but something which has to be done. So he's a perfect person for this panel. Please come to the stage and let us participate in your knowledge.
Again, the big round applause, please. The stage is yours.
Thanks. So that was a fantastic introduction. It's probably longer than my talk will be, but it's brilliant. So today what I want to talk about is rethinking the way that we do viticulture with a view to the future. And an important aspect of this is financial sustainability, because obviously the wine sector at the moment is under significant financial pressure, and a lot of people are farming grapes at a cost that is not sustainable. So what are the challenges? We've got 7.1 million hectares of vines, and some of this vineyard area, I believe, is a legacy of the past, because in the past, you know, we don't have to go back too far when there was an absolute need for lots and lots of wine. You know, volume was the key driver. And when the phylloxera crisis impacted viticulture globally, you know, people were desperate because they needed a lot of wine. So a lot of the structure of wine industries, for instance, the Languedoc in the south of France, you know, that's a vineyard area that was geared up for producing just volume. And so what we've got is we've got this shift really from the traditional wine producing countries where people were drinking a lot. And that's kind of been going down for 50 years, you know. And so we've got this factor, we've got this legacy vineyard area that was in place to supply volume, where now we don't so much need so much of that volume. Another problem we've got is the depopulation of vineyard regions. For instance, go to the Douro Valley in Portugal, spectacular vineyards. This is mountain viticulture on a grand scale. There are 43,500 hectares of vines in the Douro, many of which are on steep slopes. But If you go there, there's not so many people there. People have been leaving the vineyard areas, moving to cities. So you've got old people farming these vineyards. And so this is a big issue in many areas where people have moved away from agriculture and agricultural settings towards cities. If you look at the statistics in the US, for instance, when tractors came along, and now tractors really only came along in the 30s and 40s. And when tractors came along, you've got this massive decrease in the horse population because horses were used in agriculture, but also because you've got the efficiency of mechanization of agriculture, you've got this amazing shift from, I think it was something like 30% of people involved in farming to like 4% now. So you've got this massive depopulation of agricultural regions and wine regions generally. So that's a big problem. The other challenge we've got is climate chaos. I don't need to say anything about this. It's not just a warming trend, but also it's more unpredictable weather trends. And that's a big issue. And we're looking at a warmer, drier future. And for many wine regions, such as the Mediterranean-style wine regions, warmer and drier spells disaster. And then we've got this issue of the lack of financial sustainability. And one of the factors is that people don't do their sums properly. Now, if you took $1 million, I used dollars because that was the calculation of compound interest that I was using. You take $1 million. In 10 years, if you're investing this, you're investing this maybe in some fairly safe global ETFs or something. You can probably guarantee you're going to get 7% over a long period. Now, over 10 years, 7% compounded means you've gone from 1 million to 1.96, so 1,967,151.36. So that's just with 7% compound interest each year. This original million, say for instance you had a vineyard that cost you $1 million. Now, after 10 years, if you'd invested that money in a modest fund, you would have this much. But people don't calculate that. And then, of course, you've got to look at inflation as well. So with inflation, what you're looking at, inflation since then, and this is in pounds, but imagine this is in dollars, it's gone up from 1 million to 1.354 million. So the gap there, which most people don't account for, is quite a large chunk of money. It's like 600,000. And people don't do their sums. They're sitting on vineyard land that's worth a lot of money, but they don't calculate the lost opportunity cost of having that money. So if you're going to be truly financially sustainable, you have to do these sums. You have to put in the lost opportunity cost of that capital sum that you've got because it's been paid off 5 generations ago. That's still something that could earn you money if you traded it. So that's a challenge. So one other big challenge, I think, when you get to a situation with vineyards is it takes about 5 years to get a vineyard from planting into a decent scale of production. You'll probably get a crop after 3 years, but let's say 5 years to plant to get a vineyard in production. So what happens is you get this situation, we've had this in the UK, you've got a boom. So English sparkling wine is booming, so people are planting vineyards, boom, 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 boom. By the time there's a downturn and a softening in demand, people have planted now, in 5 years' time, they'll be getting a lot more grapes. So what you don't do is you don't have these supply and demand curves in sync. They're displaced somewhat. So by the time the demand's gone down, those more vineyards are still being planted. So then people start pulling vineyards out. And then there's a demand again. And so what you get is these curves are out of sync. And this is a big challenge. So this is why sometimes some sort of state intervention, the governments often do this in countries like France, is justified because it's providing a buffer. As long as the cycle is going to pick up again, sometimes putting in some state intervention can provide this valuable buffer so that these curves aren't running wildly out of sync with each other. So this is an issue. Now let's think about what sort of things we could see in vineyards in the future that would make them more affordable to farm. One of them is robotics, and this is something that is already present in vineyards. This was a vineyard in the Mackinac, and the guy's been using this for a year or two now. It's the Vitibot Bacchus, and you'll see at the back there you can go down here, and this is a device for clearing the undervine growth. And this is all robotic. It's electrically powered. There's a lot of technology being developed now. This is something I saw in Italy at a demonstration day. There's a lot of people working hard on robotics so that they can get vineyards more mechanized, because labor is one of the huge costs in viticulture. And every time you're going down a row, especially if you've got close planting, because you've got close planting, you know, if you think about a 1 hectare vineyard, 10,000 vines a hectare, to go down the rows all the way up, you're doing 10 kilometers. So it's a lot of distance. Robotics, I think, is something that's being developed, and that shows a lot of promise. Then we've got things like this. This is a Monarch electric tractor. Sadly, Monarch have just gone bust, but this was an electric tractor that can be mechanized, that can be operated robotically. But the company was very promising, but they've gone bust now. And then we've got things like this. This is a demonstration of the Australian Wine Technical Conference this year. This is UVC, and it's UVC is basically is a way to treat powdery mildew. And there's a lot of companies working on this now. The problem is with this technology is it has to be done at night in the dark. And you have to have 4 hours of darkness after the treatment for it to be effective in killing all the powdery mildew. If you think about when you have the most powdery mildew pressure, it's when the nights are the shortest. So the challenge is sometimes you only have 2 or 3 hours of operation each night to cover your vineyard. But this is a technology that's quite promising. This is a vineyard in Germany. This is another way of saving costs, is if you can do minimal pruning or zero pruning, or you can mechanize pruning. And this is something that people have been trying quite a bit. They tried it in Australia in the 80s, in Coonawarra especially, and it didn't work out so well. But this particular vineyard is actually this is Kloster Eberbach. They've got a few blocks like this, and it seems to work for them. It's not their top quality wine, but this is a good quality vineyard they've got it in. And what they say, it allows them to stagger the harvest a bit, because the grapes you get from this sort of, you get small clusters all over the canopy, and they develop and ripen a bit later. So that allows you to stagger your harvest a bit. So that's useful. And then you've got technology that's aimed to reduce the use of pesticides. This is in Japan. You'll find in Japan most of the growing season, most of the rainfall comes during the growing season. And this is in Nagano, and they've got various technologies in Japan from keeping the rain off the grape clusters. And this has been tried elsewhere as well. This is a technology called VitiTunnel, and this has been trialed. I know at least Lafite have trialed this. And what happens is it's automatic, and whenever it rains, which is where you're going to get the downy mildew risk, this shield comes out, and it protects the vines. And I think Lafite, the trials they did, they used it 6 times in one growing season where it did this, and it worked. It was the only way they could avoid using copper for treating downy mildew, was to use this technology. The challenge with it is it's really expensive, and the appellation laws don't allow it. And now one other thing, the Vitivoltaic vineyard in the Rheingau near Rüdesheim, Geisenheim University have established this Vitivoltaic vineyard, and these are solar panels. They tilt to harvest the sun. It has the advantage that it cools things down a bit, because you're providing a little bit of shade, and it creates power that you can power all your electric vehicles and everything that you use in the vineyard. It looks very weird, but it's worked quite well for them. So the big question there is this a sustainable thing? Is this something you can do? Is the cost sustainable? I don't like the idea of having these metal constructions all over a vineyard, but people are thinking about what can we do? First of all, to offset the risk of disease. Secondly, to create green energy. And thirdly, to cool the vineyard down a bit. And then we've got things like drone spraying. The advantage of drone spraying is you can go in early when otherwise you might compact your soils by going in to spray your fungicides when you need to do it at the early stages. So a lot of people have started trying the drone spraying when you want to get into a vineyard, when it's a difficult time to get in the vineyard, when it might cause problems for you. And of course, then we've got to think about Vitis vinifera. Most of the varieties that are grown around the world are varieties of Vitis vinifera, and Vitis vinifera lacks our genes, these true resistance genes, to downy and powdery mildew. So as a result, we need to spray an awful lot. And actually, one of the most sustainable things you can do, and one of the ways of reducing the costs of running vineyards that's most effective, is to breed resistant varieties. And this is the way it's been done. Breeding resistant varieties, it's projects that have been going on and have really expanded quite a lot in recent years. So you're taking the resistance genes from powdery and downy mildew from American and Asian Vitis species. So they actually have these true R genes, and by crossing, you cross with vinifera, then you check that those genes are still there. And you can do that with molecular techniques now, which is really good. And then you can pyramid them, so you get more than one downy mildew resistance gene and more than one powdery resistance gene, so that the fungus can't overcome those defenses so easily. And then you back cross with vinifera to get varieties. And this is Valentin Blattner, Volker Freitag. He's a nursery guy. Blattner's been responsible for many of the good resistant varieties that are being grown today. And this is in September. These are just trial varieties that they've made in their trial vineyard. That's not been sprayed once. This is in September 23. And if you looked at the neighboring vineyards, they've sprayed them 15 times and they're still ravaged by downy mildew. And so they're doing this breeding process where they're coming up with these new varieties, trialing them. And some of them look really promising. And then they have to do microvinifications. And after a long time, you end up with new varieties. And so we get these peewees, they're often known by, and there's lots of them being grown in vineyards all around the world at the moment, and there's a big demand for them. And they're making some really nice finds. And this is a really good example from Staffelterhof in Germany, in the Moselle. They've got a 2-hectare block, Grove Paradis, where they're growing these resistant varieties, but they're also doing, and these are some of the regenerative viticulture techniques that I think are really interesting: cover cropping, mulching, using biochar, incorporating animals. And these are ways you can incorporate animals. This is at Greystone in New Zealand. They've raised the canopies so they can run sheep all the year round. Regenerative hydrology, this is a big one. I'm rushing through this, but this is all covered in the book I wrote, Regenerative Viticulture. It's really interesting. So regenerative hydrology is the way of you get your land and you basically try and keep the water on it. And it was developed in Australia in the 1950s, called the Keyline Plan, and you watch the normal flow of water on your land. So when you get a lot of water at one time, that causes erosion. But what you do is you get your land so that you keep the water on it as much as possible. In agroforestry, this is what I was talking about. This is Grove Paradis. This is Staffelterhof's vineyard. So they've got agroforestry plus resistant varieties. It's a super cool project. Last slide. The moral imperative to true sustainability is that we need to reduce farming costs. At the same time, we need more resilient vineyards. And I think this is where we can go with these sort of vineyards of the future, thinking about ways of farming that make vineyards more resilient. And I think, to be honest, true sustainability is not an option. We can't sort of like pass the bill on to the next generation. We have to actually start making vineyards really sustainable now. And that includes financial sustainability. And at the moment we have this problem that a lot of wines on the market, certainly at the bottom end of the market, are too cheap, in the sense that they're not truly sustainable. The farming cannot be sustainable to produce wines that are that cheap. And so that's all I'm going to say. It's a little rapid run through of some of the ideas, how we might make vineyards truly sustainable and vineyards of the future. And those are some of the books that I've written. This is the one that I was pimping earlier on, Regenerative Viticulture, 2nd edition. This has got all those ideas expanded in a lot more detail.
Can I do it? Yes. Give me. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie. We are now trying to set up the scene, because you're not finished yet, though. Yeah. There's some questions we need to ask. Give us the chance to ask those questions first, but of course you get the chance to ask your questions as well. Thank you so much, Jamie. You talk a lot about sustainability, and it is a trigger word in the industry nowadays. Everybody is talking about it, but we always question who is living it. When we talk about sustainability, we do need to keep 3 factors in balance. That's environmentally, it's the economical basis you're working on, because if you run out of business, there's no sustainable business anymore. And it's social factors. That means personal costs, staff. And as we all know, labor costs in the vineyard, in the winery, is probably the highest of all. For example, in Germany, the minimum wage will raise to at least almost 15 euros an hour in the future. How can wineries, wine producers keep up with these? How can they keep these 3 pillars in balance yeah, if we look at those external costs?
Well, I think they need to. First of all, is understanding how you sell your wine, and having some level of control over your route to market is really important. So, I think the best way of segmenting the wine world is by market channel. So it's how because wine is, we talk about wine globally, and I think it's meaningless. We absolutely need to segment. And segmenting by consumer group is silly, I think, because consumers behave differently on different days. So, and segmenting by birth year cohort is just like astrology. It's senseless. It's really, if people talk about Gen Z as if it's a real thing, and where you've got this massive confounder, which is lifestyle, the stage of life you're at. And if you look carefully, you'll see that someone who's Gen Z, as they get older, they change, So I think the most sensible way of segmenting the wine market is by market channel, how the wines go to market. So if you understand that, then you make yourself relevant and profitable within your segment. And I think the problem is we have too many wineries now that aren't ever going to be sustainably profitable. So then the thing they cut is they cut costs in the vineyard. So the easy way of cutting costs in the vineyard is to use herbicides and to use pesticides. And you get good yields when you use herbicides and pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. It's often the biggest yields that you get, but then you're in this vicious circle of getting bigger yields, lower wine quality, selling cheaper, and there'll always be somebody who's got wine they need to sell more cheaply than you, especially in a market where there's more supply than there is demand. So these have conspired to keep wine artificially cheap at the bottom end, and so there's not enough money to pay for the things you need to do viticulture in a truly sustainable way. But I think this is where, if you are going to cut some costs, then the best way of doing it is by growing resistant varieties, because then you cut all that spraying, as long as you can sell them. I think this is why I'm quite excited about them, because environmentally they're so much more sustainable. Actually, what would be truly sustainable is genetically modified vines, because then you could keep Pinot Noir and Riesling and Chardonnay, and you wouldn't have to spray them. This would be true sustainability, but obviously some people have a problem with that.
Exactly, and that brings me to my next question. Thank you, thank you for triggering this. You talked a lot about the so-called PVs, new varieties, but high-end winemakers and sommeliers, high-end retailers, the connoisseurs in the wine world, all are still a bit skeptical when it comes to the quality, especially because they wonder if they can be a replacement for Vitis vinifera, who is able, as we all think, or as the fine wine world thinks, is able to express the soil, the place of birth, the place where it has been grown. And we do not know yet if a Sauvignon Gris or a Cabernet Blanc is able to do the same thing, or if it's just the genetics that makes the wine taste the way it tastes.
No,
what do you answer to this?
I'm very sympathetic to that viewpoint, because I understand you've got to sell wine, and there's certain, and also that so far, most people who've been working with the resistant varieties have been making high yield techno wines sold at low prices. They're tutti frutti and they're nice and they're tasty, but not many people have taken them seriously. And I would love to see some people taking resistant varieties seriously, planting them in really good vineyards, managing them well, and then making wines in a very intelligent way rather than just simple techno tank fermented wines. Because then I think we could actually see whether these are capable of greatness or not. I think the breeding programs need to carry on. And obviously a lot of breeding programs have been driven by the more value end of the market and the needs of the market at that end. And I would love to see breeding programs, first of all, that aren't just about cool climate, that we see some warm climate varieties emerge. Then also that people would actually start breeding with a view to making really high quality wine. Actually, aside from genetic modification, we do actually have gene editing, which isn't counted as GM by most countries. And gene editing has a promise to let you keep, they're not introducing genes, but what they're doing is they're going in surgically and taking out, for instance, susceptibility genes, which are the things that the fungi use to recognize the host. And actually, there's some very interesting work on this from Italy in particular, where they've actually produced varieties that have a reasonably durable resistance to downy and powdery mildew through gene editing. And so that's something to watch, I think.
I have one last question before I hand over to Anja for your questions. When it comes to sustainability, at least in the winemaking bubble, in the sommelier bubble, I do know that very well in Germany. People are always very conflicted or divided in their opinions between the organic and biodynamic producers on the one hand, who are not using any pesticides, and on the other hand, we have sustainability labels that do allow a certain usage of pesticides in the vineyard to assure that you, at least in the end of the year, you have a harvest to pay your bills, to be economically sustainable. What is your answer to this? How do you see this conflict of interests?
So I think that the problem with many sustainability schemes is that they allow too many things. They're not really truly sustainable. I think true sustainability is, can you carry on doing the same thing for 500 years in your vineyard? There's a guy in New Zealand, Jeff Thorpe at Riverside Nurseries. He came up with this at I think it was a Sauvignon conference in 2018 or 19. And he said, if you're saying this something is sustainable, you've got to be able to keep doing it for 500 years or 1,000 years. And with most sustainability schemes, they don't meet that standard. So they use the term sustainability, but they're borrowing it and misappropriating it. I think there's organics and biodynamics are fantastic, but they're not always the most sustainable way of farming. Because, putting copper into your vineyard is a really bad idea. And if you're farming in anywhere that has some growing season rainfall, downy mildew is your problem, and copper's the only thing in the organic arsenal that actually works against it. So we've got this, we need to rethink it a little bit. God didn't say, this is what organics is, and this is what biodynamics is, and this is the best way of farming, and it's the ultimate end of the pyramid. While I think organics and biodynamics get you a long way in terms of farming the best way, I think the best way is to farm regeneratively, which is not a toolkit. It's not like a recipe, it's a toolkit. So it's a toolkit of approaches, and you pick the ones that you think can improve the biodiversity, the functional biodiversity of your vineyard, the resilience of your vineyard. And this is why I think regenerative is very positive, because anybody can start on that journey, even a big company. And we want the big companies to take up these truly sustainable ways of farming, because otherwise it's just a rich person's club. And we don't want that.
Thank you. Anja, I'll hand it over to you for your questions.
Yes, thank you. So as we are here at the end of the day, a long day, we are sitting in very comfortable chairs. We would like to have a loungy format. I change the issue a little bit and go away from sustainability. And I would like to ask you, because you write a lot about terroir, do you think you can taste soil in wine?
I think that question is I think you can taste the impact of the soil on the flavor of the wine, but you don't taste the soil in the wine. So the terroir, I think, is a very interesting topic, and I think it's fascinating. When I get together with my geek friends, often someone will say, what soil type does this wine come from? And I'll say, I think it's granite. And why do you think that? It's very bright and linear. It's got that fruit-forward character. Oh, what's this one? Oh, this is limestone. This limestone, I can feel with the acid line and the way it feels in the mouth. This is a limestone sort of wine. And so I think, clay, what does clay give to the wine? And I know these are very generalized, some approximations of what the soils are like in the vineyard, but I do think you can reliably, after you've tasted a lot, detect the characteristic soil type and the effect on the flavor of the wine. And it's often quite subtle, but it's there. And I think that we don't taste the soils, but we do taste the impact of the soils. And effectively, for that to be present in the wine, what's going to have to happen is that it's going to change the physiology of the vine in subtle ways, that the berries, after all, that's all that ends up in the fermentation, have got a different composition. So when they're crushed for white wine to make a must, or reds, they're crushed and you've got the skins there as well. What that is creating is then a fermentation medium for the yeasts to work on. And so the different composition of the must then shapes the way that the yeasts then grow and behave, because it's the yeasts that make most of the aroma compounds in wine. So when you go to the vineyards in Burgundy, you take the grapes and you crush them, you taste the juice, you can't really tell them apart. But once you allow the yeast to do their work, and so the yeast are creating compounds de novo, but they're also transforming flavor precursors present in the must. And then you get this wonderful complex thing, which is wine and wine aroma and wine flavor. And that's an indirect effect, very indirect, but it's a real thing. So obviously soil is affecting the way the vine grows, that then affects the way the grapes grow, that then affects the must in terms of the growth medium for the yeasts, which then do the work. and the bacteria as well, of course. So this is super fascinating.
So, if you talk about terroir, do you think the wine world, if we talk with each other, not if we talk with the consumer, obviously, that we are too romantically about terroir? Should we have more science in it?
No, I think I believe in romance as well as science. I don't want us to become totally reductive. We need the magic, you know. We need the talk, the chat, the stuff around wine to make it what it is. We can't just be like, oh, this has got a pH of so. It's like, oh, I can taste this chemical. We can't do that with wine. We don't understand enough about, first of all, the viticulture. Second, we don't understand enough about wine flavor chemistry, and thirdly, about human perception to put flavor down to certain compounds. It's this amazing complexity that's almost too complex for us to actually reduce down to a simple story. I think sometimes we make too much of terroir for sure. And for some wines, terroir doesn't matter. I just want a delicious drink. And this is why I quite like the natural wine movement. I love natural wine. Often you get, like a lot of natural wines were made in the same way. They have a certain flavor and character, which is more about natural wine than it is about place. But that's not always a disaster, because actually sometimes they're delicious drinks. You know, I just love them. I love these light star reds that are smashable and have this sense of deliciousness. And, you know, that's perfectly legitimate. We don't have to be able to tell where a wine comes from to enjoy it.
Okay, so my next question goes a little bit in the same direction. Do we need more science in wine, or do we need more storytelling about science?
I think what we need a true science of wine, not because that was the problem with the old scientific viticulture that saw the vineyard just as a growth medium for the vines and just thought vines growing crop plant will focus on that. Now we've got this system where agroecology, where we think about the whole agro ecosystem, and that's real science now. That was a very simple. What was labeled as science before was too simplistic. I mean, what we've got is this beautiful agro ecosystem with so many interactions. It's like. And suddenly we've got some really interesting science. So what we need more in wine is we need better science, and we need science that's explained better. We don't want the simplistic science, but also, you know, science has to take its place amidst other legitimate ways of talking about wine. Science is like one language, and we've got lots of languages for talking about wine. And they're all legitimate. And also, let's face it, people who've been growing vines for 12,000 years now, you know, the two centers of domestication, not just Georgia, also the Levant as well. And from that, wine has spread around the world, and people have been farming wine grapes, and they do their own experiments before science was even known, before we even knew what yeast were doing. People were understanding that if you did this, this, and this, the wine would taste really cool. If you did this, and not so cool. So the little trial and errors and all these many iterations have resulted in this beautiful complexity of wine. That's science, but even though it's not labeled science, it's like people trying things out and seeing what works best. That's science, and it's beautiful. It doesn't need to be framed in scientific language.
Yeah, absolutely. One more personal question. You're doing it for a long time now. So what keeps you curious about wine after all these years?
Because first of all, it's a big world, right? You can keep exploring, and I travel so much, and I go to regions, and I discover, even in regions I've been to quite a lot, I discover new things. And also what keeps me curious is when you see, like, you go to somewhere and you find some 25-year-old who's committed their life to farming a small plot of land and making wines. It's like, that's a beautiful vocational drive with wine. You know, it's something, when it's done well, when it's the most interesting sort of wine, this is kind of beautiful that people are prepared to dedicate their lives to this, not because they think it's a way of getting rich, but because they think it's an interesting thing, and then they make a product that brings people together, and a product that has cultural significance. I think that's fantastic, and that for me is very energizing, you know, and I kind of I admire what they do so much. I'm just somebody who kind of comes and looks what they're doing and tries to help the good guys to win, you know?
Okay, one last, and then I would be done. So, as we are with personal questions, you're writing so much. How do you decide which questions you follow to? Why do you take this issue and not another one?
It depends how I feel. I wake up and I think, oh, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
Great answer. Are there questions from the audience? Can we pick up on another topic? Yes, over there.
Just start speaking. It comes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, Jamie. We already met at the Cool Climate Summit, first edition in Copenhagen. I have a question for you. We're a small Belgian producers. We call ourselves natural winemakers, but when is a natural wine for you?
Great question.
Good question. So I quite like the fact that natural wine isn't tightly defined, you know? I think, and also I think a lot of producers who make natural wine don't put natural on their bottle. They just make wine, you know? And they're making wine according to their beliefs and they feel what is right. So for me, what a natural wine is, it's almost like, I don't quiz people. Like if someone says to me they're making wines naturally, I'll assume what they mean by that is they're not adding stuff to the wine apart from sulfur dioxide. So they're not acidifying the must, they're not chaptalizing, they're not fining, you know, they might do a light filtration, I think that's okay. But, you know, and I assume that they're using wild ferments as well. And so that for me is like, and I assume that they're not, you know, adding sugar at the end and things like that. But there's a lot to do with the culture of natural wine. There's ways of working. So I'd say alternative élevage is very common in the natural wine world. So I don't see many people in the natural wine world using new small oak, for instance. You know, that's not something people aspire to. They'll often be using large format, or they'll be using used barrels, or they'll be using ceramics, or Kvevery, or Talia, or Tinaja, or whatever, or concrete eggs, or stainless steel, because it's all they've got in the winery. So there's a whole set of things that go along with natural wine, I think. Then I think they'll be farming well as well, you know. So for me, that counts as natural wine. But I don't quiz them about what's your total sulfur dioxide level or anything. It's like, you know, I feel like if someone aligns naturally, then I trust them to produce something that's natural.
Thank you so much. I think that's a question the wine world like wraps their heads around.
I think we're too obsessed with it, and I think the only people who want a definition for natural wine are big companies, right? Because big companies, they want the definition. So they say, yeah, well, we're producing 6 million liters of wine a year, but we want to make a natural wine line because we think we'll make some money. So tell us what we need to do to make natural wine, and we'll do it. And it's like, that's not the way it works, guys. You know, if you do this, you kind of have to do your whole production. You can't do like 7 million liters of techno wine and then 500 cases of natural wine. It doesn't kind of work, because if you believe in it, why aren't you doing it for everything?
Yeah. So for now, we leave the term undefined and love that and embrace that. Any more questions, or otherwise? Oh yes, one last question, and I think then we
have to wrap up. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, so it's from Schloss Postwitz from the east part of Germany, and we are trying to put our research and technology on wine production. So I have a question for you: that how do you feel, or how do you think about like using the AI in wine production? Because you talk about the robotic and everything that to do the farming and everything.
That's a really good. So the question, if you didn't hear that, using AI in wine production, I think is. Do you know what? I think that's great. If you want to do something in terms of wine production that's going to save some money and produce a good result, then that's fine. I don't know exactly how it might work. I mean, you could be monitoring fermentations, you know, you would have direct sort of monitoring of the fermentation curves and everything, and looking at how that's going, or you could be looking at nutrient levels or something. No, I think that, and then knowing what to do and how to respond to the changes in the wine in real time, I think that could be really interesting. You know, I'm all for innovation like that. I think it's really important that, you know, wine is a broad sort of church, you know, and I think it's good that everyone should be talking together and not like, sometimes I know that the natural wine have tried to define themselves by how bad conventional wine is. This is what, you know, they use 120 additives, they do all this, and it's like, and we're natural. And it's like, no, we don't need that. Let's all get together and cooperate. You know, everyone's got different agendas, different customers. I think it's good to have communication about all these things and to share experiences, even if, you know, for instance, you might not choose to farm or make wine in the same way as other people. You can still have a dialogue, and I think that's really good.
So, thank you very much. Thank you to you, Jamie.